Hi everyone, I'm Chris Martinson of Peak Prosperity. It is Friday, April 28th, 2017. Here's your weekly update. Wow, so we just had the data come in, the United States gross domestic product, GDP, very low, coming in at just 0.7%, a collapse in consumer spending. Now, how can this be? Everybody's supposed to be feeling happy. The government statistics tell us that the economy is improving, and the consumer surveys, everybody says that they're happy with the economy. People are feeling confident. Of course, as you know, that's all just propaganda that's designed to get you to feel better so that you'll borrow more and spend more, because that's the game. The whole game that we are enmeshed in is about getting you to borrow more and spend more. Why? Not because it's good for the world, not really that it actually makes you happy or is good for you, but it's good for the banks. You have to understand we live in a system of, by, and for the banks, and not as institutions, but as means of allowing a very small crew of people to accumulate what we've all agreed is wealth in this story. So remember, money is an agreement we hold with each other. I know it feels real to you and me, because if you have it, it's great. If you don't, it's a disaster. But it's just an agreement about something that is actually highly intangible. You work for it, they print it out of thin air. If you lose it, that's your tough luck. When they lose it, they get it handed back to them by the taxpayers. That game's been going on for a very long time. And I had the distinct pleasure a couple weeks ago of interviewing G. Edward Griffin, who wrote Creature from Jekyll Island. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, you have to. Make it your must-read book of the summer, because it will explain how it is that banking actually operates. Summary is heads they win, tails you lose. That's how the game works. So it's been going on that way a long time, and understanding what the rules of the game are is very important. Now, I started with talking about GDP because that's how we measure economic growth. It's an imperfect measure. It really, like for instance, when Hurricane Katrina came and wiped out big portions of New Orleans, that was GDP positive because of all the rebuilding that was going to happen. So GDP measures the building, it doesn't measure the destruction part of that story. So, the best thing that could happen to GDP in the United States would be for all the buildings to fall down. We'd have to rebuild them all, right? Clearly, we would say that wouldn't be a good thing. But that's how GDP would measure it. So, whatever you measure, you get. So we're measuring this thing called GDP, but even by that measure, it's not growing all that much. And of course, we have at Peak Prosperity what we believe is an explanation for that, and it's encoded in these three magic words: too much debt. There's just too much debt in the system. And so President Trump has come along and said, with a massive, huge release to Congress, a almost 200-word description of how he wants the tax cuts and other tax changes and relief measures to go through. 200 words. By the way, not for nothing, that was his most exhaustive proposal delivered to Congress so far. So first 100 days, it's about 2 words a day. So in this 200-word thing, all he talked about was tax cuts, taking the corporate rate from 35 down to 15%, taking the individual sole proprietor and pass-through business rates, again, from 35 down to 15. So with that, there were no proposals for how revenue was going to be enhanced from some other areas. So this was really talking about massively increasing the deficit of the United States government in an attempt to get us back to growth. And so here we have to ask something, which we do at Peak Prosperity, which is growth for whose sake? Why do we need growth? Is there a point we could imagine that growing for its own sake has become the ideology of the cancer cell? We just got to grow. Why? Because we have to grow. It's what we do. What else do we do? Nothing. We grow. If you follow that along and then wander with us over into the ecological side of this story, where you see species disappearing at alarming rates, where they are now openly questioning, Bloomberg article came out yesterday talking about what is the value of all this coastal frontal property in South Florida, which is now actively seeing high tides invading the streets because sea level rise is already wiping out the value of that real estate across the coast there. What are we doing when we're growing simply because we need to grow? Why? Not because you need it or I need it, but because the banking system needs it. Well, why does the banking system need growth? Well, because of the type of money we have that we use. What's that? It's debt-based money. Once you can follow that train along, it's very easy to see where this story is going. It's going to continue along until it breaks. And that's what the central banks are actually doing, is they're perpetuating something that has no future, and they're going to do it until it breaks. Not because they're bad people necessarily, maybe a few are, not because they're evil, but because they are wildly ignorant. They don't see the larger system. All they understand is power and money and keeping those things going as they have for the past few hundred years. Now, past couple hundred years, we went from being about 1 billion people to being 7.4 billion people, from having largely unexplored continents for resources to fully explored continents for resources, from having abundant resources per person to having steadily decreasing resources per person. Back then, it made sense to design a system that could grow forever, but forever has arrived. We're out of forever. So now we have to be intelligent, we've got to be adults, we've got to start doing things very differently, which is why I do what I do, talking to you directly. You and I have to figure out how we are going to act differently in this story, how we are going to be differently in this story, because there's no program of changes, there's no technology tweaks, there's no electing the right person that fixes this story. We have to shift our consciousness into a new place, away from the idea that it's all about humans and we can grow as much as we want without thinking about anything, to one where humans are a part of a beautiful, interconnected system, one that requires us to inhabit it as if we were a part of it, not apart from it. So that's what we're doing at Peak Prosperity, is starting to understand what do you need to know so you can take actions and begin to be differently in this story. Please come by, check out all the great material we've got. That's all the time I've got this week. See you next week. Goodbye.